Early review code for Ghost of Yōtei was provided by Sony. In my old video on Horizon Forbidden West, I said that initially it felt pointless to review that game. It's a big Sony polished AAA cinematic open world, and you know exactly where you stand on that. Personally, it's not a genre, if you can call it that I could ever muster up a great deal of enthusiasm for. But then, Horizon Forbidden West began to unfurl in a way that showed the influence of more genuinely open games to the extent that my view shifted pretty positively on that game. And when it comes to Sucker Punch's upcoming Ghost of Yōtei, the same process applies, just unfortunately this time in reverse. Because look, this really is a game where you know what it's going to be. If this happens to be the kind of game that you enjoy, you will almost certainly enjoy this. It is about as typical as one of those games can be. When I examine its individual component parts, there's little about Yōtei I can say is materially bad. It all basically works in exactly the way you expect. What potentially spicy edges might exist are all methodically sanded down to a nub. There's very little wrong with it, and very little will go wrong for you as you play it. The thing is though, when you zoom out and examine the game's larger vision, it really seems as if there's an effort to make some grand strides from its predecessor, Ghost of Tsushima, but the strings are still very much there, forcefully holding Yōtei's premise back from achieving something that to me might have been truly meaningful. Much like my experience of the last title, it's the most basically fine game I have ever played. If you wanted more Ghost of Tsushima, then by God are you going to get it. It's just, after 40 hours finishing the story and a few more doing some odds and ends in the world, there's just that lingering feeling that this could and should have been so much more. Because man, it starts so strong. It's a ghost game. The main crux of the plot is still revenge for some heinous crime enacted upon our protagonist. But the way everything is laid out here represents a marked step up from Tsushima in terms of expediency. There's no need to contextualize the different factions at play or show the ferocity of your opponent through lengthy sneaking missions after being brought low in some way, where you have to get your gear back only to be brought low again, I guess. It turns out that when a truly awful thing happens, as is the case with Atsu, left for dead after witnessing her whole family being massacred, there's not a whole lot of preamble needed to sell an audience on the desire to get those responsible. Crossing the first name off of Atsu's revenge list isn't some vague future objective, it's your tutorial. These people aren't untouchable. Atsu is neither naive nor weak. She's hardened by a lifetime of the kind of rage most people would be unable to bear. Her resolve unshaking as she does what must be done to right what she sees as not simply a personal quest, but some great cosmic imbalance. There's this feeling that she should have died that night, but instead has now simply been unleashed as ghost upon this decaying purgatory of her past life. And as soon as you take control, your purpose is clear. Breath of the Wild had destroy Ganon, you've simply to eliminate the gang of outlaws known as the Yōtei 6. There's honestly more personality, more character conveyed in this first half an hour of the game than Jin benefited from across hours and hours of Tsushima. And crucially, it's conveyed in a way that seems like it's trying to chart a different path from the self-seriousness that to some, read me, bogged down that predecessor. You know, quickly setting up the Yōtei 6 as some Lady Snowblood or Kill Bill list to go through. The soundtrack, incorporating the shamisen on Atsu's back in the same way Ennio Morricone's Western soundtracks might utilise surfy, trebly guitar. There's a style here emanating from every frame of this thing right from the off. And Atsu is legitimately a great character, performed fantastically, with which to take that vision forward. It's just a shame that for all the strides made in this direction, well, this is still a Ghost game. It's still a big open world AAA title. The mechanical bloat and narrative cruft almost inherent to that structure that likely immediately pops into your mind when I say that heavily dilutes what early promise there was, in my eyes wasting what could have been a truly iconic character. See, while the opening makes for a refreshing nod towards getting the job done, it also speaks to a more organic flexibility with which you think you might be allowed to take on this task, that the rest of the game resolutely fails to capitalise on. In the run-up to getting my hands on it, I saw talk of this pursuit of the Yōtei 6 being completely non-linear, allowing players the choice of how they wanted to take each enemy out. Its new card system hints at this direction, with the thought that you're learning things about, say, the Kitsune or the Oni that might help you in your inevitable battle against them. The more you learn, the better equipped you'll eventually be. But the reality is, this is an open world game with checklists that need to be ticked off. Instead of something like Shadow of Mordor, where these outlaws might just be roaming the map, allowing for true emergent gameplay, the element of surprise where you come up against them before you're ready, outside of heavily specified missions, the Yōtei 6 might as well not exist. Instead, you talk to a weapon master to get the deets on one of the 6's weakness. You get your new weapon, then the next mission you infiltrate and get close to the member in question, only for a cutscene to interrupt proceedings, and the person gets away somehow. Then you need more missions where you get your bearings, followed by another mission where the scripted duel finally happens. It's a rigidity, emphasised further by the game's fairly anemic approach to cutscene storytelling that, especially after having to go through these motions multiple times and for several hours for each member of the 6, gradually sees the vitality of that great initial premise sapped from such a visually resplendent world. Now, that's not to say that the combat can't be fun or that storytelling is all bad here. Far from it. Some of the bespoke narrative arcs and the associated twists you uncover on these missions can be genuinely surprising, if spread a little thin and rarely amounting to more than the boilerplate question of, is it worth Atsu pursuing revenge at all costs? But I also ended up spending the first several hours of my playthrough pretty tethered to that initial hub town you come across, taking on the several bounties the game provides you for lesser outlaws across various areas of the map. And these, in fact, came way closer to representing that vibe I was looking for in my pursuit of the larger Yōtei 6. Indeed, the best storytelling in the game, for me, is instead found in its little moments and environmental details. Remember that you too are also an outlaw of sorts in this world, and the associated bounty notices you come across speak with increasing urgency of the threat that you, the Onryo, pose to Lord Saito. The bounty on your head increases along with it. In your travels, you'll come across random ronin, presumably doing whatever ronin have to do to survive in such a harsh world in the middle of such cataclysmic political transition. Similarly, they stumble upon you, the woman whose bounty could make them rich, underestimating you and paying the ultimate price. A duel in a field between two strangers, one left standing at the end of it all, the other drifting away on the wind. You go on your way. I have a separate video coming on my problems with the Kurosawa mode found across both Ghost games now, but these moments, these small stories of how little life now means, of Atsu's almost necessary indifference to bloodletting, arguably see our protagonist more readily fit the Toshiro Mifune Sanjuro mold that the developers clearly have such affection for far more effectively than Jin ever could. It's just a kind of story that, again, is undercut by the game's larger structure. As your legend grows, the world ostensibly becomes more treacherous to match. Ambushes, new enemy tactics introduced to stop you in your tracks. It's just that by the time you get to that point, you've unlocked so many fast travel points for every little activity and trinket you've encountered that you will almost never have to stumble into any of those more novel challenges. And this is just one way in which the game seems like it's trying to break out and do some new things, only for the very nature of a checklist-ticking open-world game to bring it all back to simply more of what came before. Take the new weapon system for example. In the original game you had stances with which to match particular enemy types. Stone against shields, wind against spears, that kind of thing. It wasn't bad, but you could say it ended up feeling a little like a game of rock, paper, scissors. The enemy approaches, you select the one correct corresponding stance, and then you attack. Yōtei seeks to introduce some variety to proceedings by having you unlock a bunch of different weapons through story missions. And these weapons have you examining which type of weapon the enemy is holding, selecting the one correct corresponding weapon to counter it, and then attacking. Sure, there's a bunch of neat animations accompanying them, I guess, but there's very little about the fundamental function of any of these weapons that detracts from that rock, paper, scissors dynamic of the first game. No accomplishment for having gone about things a different way, just the feeling that you're doing less damage. Similarly, the much-touted card system really just functions as a means of grouping together related open-world objectives. It's a checklist. Outside of cooking boosts, camping doesn't offer a whole lot more than simply fast-travelling to a vendor. Hell, even the skill tree makes less narrative sense here. Jin spent so much of the prior game having to set aside his more noble samurai ways to become the titular ghost, so learning these new, less honourable skills made sense. Atsu is the ghost from the very start, and so adding all these shrines to learn the same things Jin did feels a little tacked on by comparison. All of this to say, it might sound odd, but what Yōtei needed was less. Less stuff, less systems and opportunities for the player to make their experience of this world less prickly. The world Atsu inhabits should feel hostile to her, and to me, the player should have less reasons to simply skip over it all, allowing for more focus on that core struggle, the one checklist that actually matters here. There's all these different modes here, like Kurosawa and now Takashi Miike and Shinichiro Watanabe. The game is trying really hard to show us what media it's influenced by, but the fact is that it isn't Yojimbo or 13 Assassins or Samurai Champloo. Instead, thanks to its generic open world that tries so hard to alienate as few people as possible, to appeal to as broad an audience as possible, the things that could have given it that identity, that personality that so drips from the works of those named directors is drained away like the arterial spray from so many felled ronin. Ghost of Yōtei isn't a bad game, but as such an avid fan of this type of media, and with all the nods the game seems to be making in that direction, it could have been such a special one. And unfortunately, for me, that just isn't the case. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, you can help me out by liking, subscribing, becoming a member, and even hyping now, which apparently costs you nothing if that option is available to you. It all helps more than you know. A massive thanks as well to my patrons, who you can see on screen and are all getting access to exclusive, fully produced videos that aren't available here. Your continued support on patreon.com/writingongames is what allows me to keep going with the work I do on this channel, and I seriously cannot express how grateful I am for that. You are all the best. Special thanks go to Ewan Patterson, David Butkus, Brendan Hess, Mason Miller, Alex O'Sullivan, Michael Tritt, Rickety Cricket, Cameron Siniseros, Charles Chaliu, Allride, Thomas Ife, Luke Shaw, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Dolly Bowman, Young Condor, Danis Sikauskis, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Leah Chinello, Captain Knusprig, Bryce Snyder, Page Melt Limited, David Björk, Timothy Jones, Matthew Grover, Shardfire, Lynn Browning, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.